You're about to hear two conversations that Jack and I had. Uh, one with Sima Shine and Alireza Nader, the other with Jonathan Rynhold about the 12-day war between Israel and Iran. We are recording this on Monday, June the 30th. And I guess Jack and I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just summarizing or reflecting on what we heard. What I thought was really interesting about Sima and Ali Reza was kind of how they mapped out the domestic situation within Iran. Ali Reza was at pains to talk about that this binary thinking between Islamic Republic on the one hand and monarchy led by the Shah's son on the other misses out huge amounts domestically in the middle. He was at pains to talk about the Women for Freedom group within Iran is particularly interesting and influential. So I thought that was one interesting thing that he talked about. And the other was actually that, Khamenei, he's in his mid 80s, but he's made increasingly large numbers of really terrible strategic decisions. He is not really surrounded by people, kind of non-ideological people. And actually what Ali Reza was suggesting was that there's people within the institutions of the Islamic Republic, but who are potentially perhaps less ideological, who might actually seek to unseat him. So I thought that was very interesting. Jack, where did the conversations meet you?
Yeah, I agree that those aspects were fascinating. I think Alireza's caution about some of the messaging that viewers and readers in the West are particularly kind of bombarded with were especially important. Um, I was also quite struck. There can be few Israelis, I suspect, with a better sense of Iranian military capabilities than Sima. So to hear her express her surprise at the ease and speed with which Israel gained control of the Iranian skies was I thought quite telling. On your conversation with Johnny, I'll come to you for your kind of highlights in a minute, but I think for me, I was struck once again by a conversation you and I have a lot, which is just how transactional and capricious a political figure Trump is, and how, kind of, I wouldn't want to be the person setting my policy by being able to accurately predict how the way in which Donald Trump is going to respond to any particular set of circumstances. Viewers will have to judge if I'm summarizing Johnny fairly, but this it strikes me at least, and I think it struck Johnny to a degree, that this is not a man of ideology, but a man of kind of constant interpretation of what is the maximum kind of self-interest to be gained. So they were my
But
highlight.
he does place Trump within an ideological,
Yeah, which was
historical
fascinating.
framing, kind of a belligerent isolationism of kind of the 30s, etc. There, Johnny talks about these two types of American firsters, but one of whom are the one's the Japanese attack. They're very happy actually even to drop the nuclear bomb on Japan. So I thought it was interesting that he actually did try to place Trump within a kind of ideological framing. Anyway, I hope that readers and listeners will enjoy the conversation. We'll start with Seema and Ali Reza, and then we'll get to Johnny Reinhold and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Giacomo Giacomin. I'm co-editor of Fathom. I'm delighted to be joined today by both Sima Shine and Alireza Nader. Sima is a senior researcher and former director of the research program Iran and the Shiite Axis at Israel's Institute for National Security Studies. For most of her career, she served in the Israeli intelligence community. Her last position was head of the Research and Evaluation Division of the Mossad. Ali Reza, meanwhile, is the president and senior advisor at the Nader Research Group in Washington, D.C. He's a former senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and a former senior policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. Sima and Alireza, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Just to give some very brief context for our audience, we're speaking on Monday, the 30th June, a week now after the US strikes on the Fordo nuclear facility and elsewhere. It's 17 days since Israel's strikes on Iran began, and with a ceasefire holding thus far. Sima, if I can come to you first and go back a bit and then forward. During the war's early stages, prior to the US intervention, there seemed to be a lack of clarity between whether Israel's aims were to destroy Iranian nuclear capacity or to downgrade it. How do you understand Israel's war aims on the one hand? And then on the other, what is your assessment of the actual damage that has been done to the program?
Thank you. Yes, the Israel aim, as it was proclaimed by the government, was two aims. One was to I don't think the word destroy was used, but I think to harm dramatically the nuclear program in order to remove as essential threat on Israel. And the other one was the ballistic missiles. These were the two issues, the nuclear program and the delivery system that can be also delivery for nuclear warhead, but can also be, as we saw during the war, a very harmful conventional weapon. So these were the two targets of the war. I know that here and there we heard also people talking about, also in the government, talking about regime change. I think it very in a short period of time it vanished, because everybody understands that I think that you cannot remove a regime through a military activity like Israel has done. And these two targets were at most in the center of the Israeli attack. Now, as to the evaluation, as we all know, there is a huge battle on narratives of what happened and how much damage was caused. I think it's too early to be sure about the amount of the damage. What can be said, and I accumulate the information coming from both the intelligence communities as well as the IAEA and some visual pictures that we have already seen. All this together, I would say, inflicted quite a damage on the nuclear program. I think the three sites were specifically attacked. The first that was, I think, the most damage is the Isfahan conversion plant. It's a conversion from uranium and natural uranium to UF6, which is then put in the centrifuge. But it's also a place where conversion for metal and enriched to uranium. And I think this site, as far as I understand, has suffered a huge damage. The second one, Natanz, the biggest plant for enrichment in Iran. As far as I know, there was a upper part of the program of the plant that was enriching to 60%, and it was destroyed completely. The underground facility that is a huge one, very big. As far as I understand, there is a huge damage to the centrifuge. Whether the whole complex has been damaged in a way that cannot be restored, I don't know. But from what I understand is, first of all, Israel has attacked the electricity going to the plant, and by stopping suddenly the electricity, most of the centrifuges that are spinning very quickly are being collapsing. So it looks as if that is the damage. As I said, we don't know if they can reconstruct it later. Fordow that was attacked by the Americans because Israel said it doesn't have the bombs that may infiltrate into the 60 meters behind the mountain. We know that there are holes in the upper part of the site. It is a smaller site, much smaller than Natanz. It was enriching to 60%, and it had also the material of 60% there. We know the Iranians have put sand on the entrances to both sides, in both sides, because they saw that somebody could enter commando forces or something like that. And we know that there is a damage. I saw the IAEA saying that there is a huge damage to Fordow. I don't know. We didn't see yet something. We do see already Iranians walking close to the place, trying to open and to see and to get inside to see what happened. What we don't know exactly is the issue of the material. Now, the material, as we know, everybody is talking about the 408 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, which was in the last IAEA report, and that's what the agency knows. We don't know where it is, and we also don't know, which is, from my point of view, very important as well, all the kilograms, the tons, not kilograms, of 20% enriched uranium that can in a very short time be enriched to 60 and to 90. So the Iranians have said before the war that they have spread it in different places, taken it from the usual places where the IAEA knew that it is, because they have checked it, and they have put it in different places. So we don't know if they put everything in different places. We don't know what was striked, and probably, no question, probably Iran does have enriched uranium. Might be the 60%, might be both 60 and 20. And one more thing that I want to add is, according to the JCPOA, the IAEA inspectors were able to search also and to inspect the plants where the centrifuge were constructed. Now we know in the last 3 to 4 years, the IAEA inspectors could not do it. So my guess is that there is no question that Iran has produced more centrifuges than is deployed, and probably they have somewhere advanced centrifuge that they can use in the future if they decide in the future. And the last point I want to mention on the technical issue is that very close to the Natanz plant, the Iranians have been digging in the last years tunnels. They said it will be in order to hold the material there, but we suspected that it will be for enrichment. And now, in the beginning of June, when the Board of Governors decided that Iran is in non-compliance, the retaliation of Iran was to say that they are going to enrich in a third place. I assume this is the place. As far as I know, it was not striked till here.
Thank you, Sima. Alireza, I'd like to talk with you about the impact of this sort of 12-day war, as it's already being called, on both the Islamic Republic regime and also the people of Iran. Let's perhaps look at the regime first. In what kind of state has it left the regime? There are some who are arguing that it's shown a calcified regime that's shown to be a weak paper tiger. Others that it will cause the regime to only intensify its oppression and its race towards the bomb. What's your assessment of the damage to the war on the regime itself, first of all?
I think the Israeli attack against the Islamic Republic was a devastating attack against the regime. It was humiliating personally for Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards. If you look at Khamenei's latest speech from his underground shelter, he looks visibly shaken. looked very pale. His face looked thinner. I'm not a doctor. I can't judge his physical condition, but we can summarize that he's probably in shock and he's humiliated, and the regime itself has been set a major setback. That's suffered a major setback on the nuclear issue. But considering how much money the regime spent indirectly and directly on the nuclear program, this is a huge loss, not just for the regime, but for the Iranian people. And when I say that, I mean that Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic Republic put the country of Iran in this situation. They decided to waste so many resources and so many lives on this futile nuclear program. And now they see the result of it. It's a major defeat and humiliation. What is the war like for the Iranian people? Look, I lived in Tehran during the Iran-Iraq War as a child. The entire time I lived in Tehran, I experienced aerial bombing. It's a very terrifying experience. And so we have to remember during this war, the biggest victims are the civilians in both Israel and Iran. The Israelis who've had to live in underground shelters. That really reminds me of my childhood. And the videos I saw of Tehran, I think are very traumatizing for me personally, because I've seen a lot of images like that before. In terms of whether this campaign weakened the regime enough to lead to its overthrow, I think it's too soon to tell. Like Sima said, these sort of military actions don't lead to regime overthrow historically. We have to remember that 3 years ago, the people of Iran rose up against the regime during the Woman Life Freedom Uprising. And since late 2017, there have been multiple popular uprisings in Iran against the regime. They have been almost all peaceful, based on civil resistance. Couple of weeks before the Israeli attack on Iran, there were widespread trucker strikes throughout Iran. We've seen major labor strikes across the country in the past few years. It depends who you talk to. Some people will tell you that the Israeli military strikes help the cause of democracy, but people like Narges Mohammadi, the Nobel Prize winner, is very opposed to the military strikes by Israel. And she stated that they have set back the Iranian people's quest for democracy in Iran. So again, it's who you ask. Of course, we can't go survey 92 million Iranians and get an accurate image and understanding of how Iranians feel. There are 92 million Iranians in Iran and several more million Iranians in the diaspora. No one person or group speaks for Iranians. The Islamic Republic certainly does not speak for the Iranian people, and no one outside of Iran can claim to speak for the Iranian people either. So I would be very skeptical about very black and white claims regarding how people in Iran feel. I've talked to different types of people, and I've heard different stories. For example, there was one story about somebody who was chairing the attack against the Revolutionary Guard's bases, and then one of the attacks destroyed his home and almost killed his family, and then he was against it. And so I think we should just really remember the people on the ground. Yes, I think it's a good thing the regime's nuclear program has been set back. Personally, I never thought diplomacy would reach a positive end with this regime. I think diplomacy under the Obama administration really kicked down the can. It delayed dealing with the nuclear issue. And the Islamic Republic has always intended to create nuclear weapons. Now we'll have to see that after this very serious setback, if it has the will and the resources to continue this program. I'm skeptical that they will. But as long as Khamenei is in power and his circle is in power. I wouldn't be surprised if they continue with the same course, though there will be a lot of pressure, not just from the public in Iran, but from within the regime as well, for Khamenei to change his course. And I think there's also the possibility that if Israel doesn't kill Khamenei, he could be removed from power by elements from within the regime.
Thank you, Alireza. I'd like to stay with some of those ideas, but particularly keeping the focus on the civilian people on the ground. And I'd like to commend to our viewers and readers a Substack article of yours entitled "Israel Must Answer Some Important Questions" that I read this morning. Also looking at the answer you've just given me, here in the UK and in the United States, in the online battle for information, we are presented with a number of figures who do claim to speak for the Iranian people, often from abroad. So with that consideration, perhaps you could delve into some of those important questions that you outlined in that article for us.
Well, one topic I like to talk about is Reza Pahlavi, and I know he's quite popular in Israel and among some in the diaspora. I know Mr. Pahlavi really well, actually. I collaborated with him for a good 8-9 years, and at first I was really attracted to his message of unity and democracy, but unfortunately, Mr. Pahlavi has decided to go against his original message, and he has declared himself the leader of the opposition, and his supporters, his core supporters, expect him to go back to Iran and become the Shah, which, knowing him very well, I think is just really unrealistic. I don't think he has the character or the courage, frankly, to lead the opposition, to go back to Iran. I think Iran is going to be very chaotic for the next several years. There's going to be an intense competition for power. Again, there are 100 million Iranians across the world. That's a very diverse culture, diverse ethnically, religiously, in terms of ideology. And we often assume that the choices are simple. It's the Islamic Republic or the monarchy. And I think this is a very false choice. A lot of Iranians I know are not just opposed to monarchy, but don't believe Mr. Pahlavi has what it takes. And I was actually quite surprised that he has announced that he has set up a QR code broadcast by Iran International so the Revolutionary Guards can defect to him. I've seen Mr. Pahlavi in action. He has no capability to do such things. And as an advocate of Israeli-Iranian relations, because I think the two peoples have a lot in common and can have a very bright future, I just want to make sure that my Israeli friends, our Israeli friends, understand that Mr. Pahlavi is not such a shoo-in, that if it seems too good to be true, it is probably too good to be true. I think Mr. Pahlavi and his team think that if they have the support of the Israeli government, of Benjamin Netanyahu, that he can place them in power in Iran. And I think that's really highly naive and, quite frankly, offensive to a lot of Iranians I speak about. I think hopefully if Iran becomes a more open and democratic society, not an authoritarian system, whether it's a theocracy or monarchy, I believe that Iranians and Israelis could have really good relations, but we have to be careful these days when it comes to public relations, when it comes to information, not to believe everything we see on social media, on X, on Persian language broadcasts that heavily promote Mr. Pahlavi. Because I think the reality and the fantasy that's being sold about him are very different.
Thank you, Alireza. Sima, before I turn to my next planned question, I wonder if you wanted to make any comment at all about how the kind of issues that Alireza discusses are playing out in Israel at the moment.
Yeah, there is, of course, it's correct that what Alireza is saying, that there are those Israelis who believe that the regime change is very close. I personally don't belong to these people. I think it's a very difficult mission in Iran to make a regime change because the regime is very harsh on the population, is willing to kill people on the streets. It's very difficult for people to come out against the regime. And as we, I was asked by many during these days, what is the difference between Syria and Iran? Why it happened in Syria and it cannot happen in Iran? And I always tell everyone who asks me that there are two differences. I'm not speaking about the numbers, the 90 million with what is in Syria and the big state and everything. But there are two immediate differences. One is the fact that in Syria there wasn't a position. It was supported by a superpower like Turkey. There was a leader, and he knew what he wanted. And there was a Syrian military that didn't want to fight this time. These two elements, I think, are not available in Iran. There is no organized opposition, there is no leader, there is no superpower that supports the opposition, and there is a huge number, I think some millions of IRGC, Basij, and others that are part of the regime and want the regime to stay because it's their life, their finance and everything, and therefore they are willing also to fight. And we see every time there is a demonstration, people are on the street immediately, they are starting arresting them, and if it doesn't work, they are also willing to kill. So this is a huge difference from everything we have seen in Syria and in other places, and therefore I really don't see any similarity. That doesn't mean that the regime is immune. I think the regime knows that it is hated by a big percentage of the population. That doesn't mean, and this is something that I'm trying to explain to my friends in Israel, that the fact that you are bombing Iran doesn't mean that those that are against the regime will support you. They are patriotic, Iranian patriots, and they don't want to be bombed by anyone from the outside. So I don't think that people have started to like the regime because of the war. On the contrary, they understand that this regime has brought them to a no end. Really, nothing that can be achieved. Not with the US and not with others, not with the Europeans. They understand that all this bravado talking about the superpower and about their relations with Russia and China didn't support them when they needed it. So everybody understands how much money, as you said, Alireza, that was spent on something that now is in ruins. So I think the picture is a very complex one. I'm sure there are enough people within the regime that understand that something wrong went in the direction they took. Where are they able to pronounce it? Are they able to put it in meetings and to understand all the mistakes they've done along the road? I doubt it. I think the way they are talking about the victory in this war doesn't I understand the need to say it, everything is understood, but that will not help them to understand what happened and why it happened and how to improve it. So I think the situation continues to be very difficult in Iran. The question now I think will be whether they have the capabilities to go for an agreement with the US. Because if they will go for an agreement on the terms of Trump, they might get relief of sanctions and improved economic situation. But for the time being, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the situation between Iran and Syria is very different. You had an organized military fighting the Assad regime. No such thing in Iran exists. There are a lot of opposition groups and opposition personalities very active in Iran. I can tell you that the families of the regime's victims are highly regarded in Iran. There are many prisoners in Evin and elsewhere that are highly respected in Iranian society. I expect these individuals to have a key role in any post-regime situation in Iran. And if you look at revolutions, if we study revolutions, you can never predict what happens, right? Very few people predicted the 1979 revolution in Iran. People have been expecting the Islamic Republic to fall for 46 years, but it will eventually fall, and we can't predict when that will happen, through what mechanism, but I think it's coming sooner or later. I think the ruling elite in Iran realize that they've reached a dead end. They're getting devastated by Khamenei's policies. They want to make sure that their wealth and privileges are preserved. A lot of these people may not even be Islamists. They might not even be particularly religious. They send their kids to party in LA and Toronto, but they just want to make sure that Khamenei doesn't ruin everything for them. So we could see change from these people. We could see I think the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij are greatly demoralized or weakened. I think if the security apparatus in Iran has to become very weak and demoralized, like Sima said. There are hundreds of thousands of Revolutionary Guards and Basijis. We can't tell what the morale of these forces are, how willing they are to fight for the Islamic Republic. So without knowing the answer to some of these major questions, we can't predict what will happen. But I think anything can happen in Iran. And I think the world is going to be surprised by some of the forces that will emerge to challenge the Islamic Republic, because the world has this idea of what Iran is like, and it's often very different than the reality. And I'll give you one example. I think the woman freedom movement in Iran is the most powerful force for change in Iran. And just because we don't see demonstrations in Iran today doesn't mean that force hasn't gone away. I think it's very active in Iranian society, as are environmental activists. There are lots of groups we don't really know about. Even in the diaspora, I can say I collaborate with lots of different groups and people informally, but we don't give ourselves a name per se, but we are active. I don't think you have to be a monarchist or the MEK to be part of the opposition. Unfortunately, people in Washington just see those groups, although they do interact with lots of other types of Iranian Americans. But the monarchists in particular get a lot of attention despite their low capabilities. However, there are lots of different people and groups across the world, including in Iran, who do have much greater capabilities.
Thank you, Alireza. Sima, you preempted my next question a little bit in the end of your last answer. From an Israeli perspective, how do you see the coming months? That there's been talk of Iranian-American nuclear negotiations continuing. At the moment, Trump's public messaging is that the details aren't too important because everything has been destroyed. That remains his message. The regime is publicly at the moment rejecting sitting down with the US. What's your vision of what the next few months might look like? Or what are the possibilities? What are the various possibilities of what the next few months might look like?
It's easier to say what are the possibilities than to predict what will happen, because for the time being, and we are just some days after I think one week after the end of the war, I think the Iranians are still trying to understand what happened, how it happened. I think it's a major shock for the leadership to see how they were penetrated, how Israel succeeded to demolish all the anti-aircraft systems, and it's really you look on the way Israel operated with open skies and in striking not only places and assets, but also launchers when they came out in all over the big country, sometimes in the west, sometimes in the east, and being destroyed. I think that this is it's something that Iran for years was hearing Israel saying we will attack if they go for a bomb. They never believed it's going to happen. They never believed that the U.S. will act also. And at the end of the day, if they believe that Israel will do something, they thought it will be something small, hitting two places or three, and that's all. They didn't take into account such an attack. I didn't mention, of course, within the nuclear issue, I didn't mention the scientists that were assassinated. These are the people, the exact people that have been working on weaponization. They are very knowledgeable people. They were the weaponization group, part of the weaponization group. They are not anymore, and the precise knowledge of Israel, of the names of the people, where they are living, where they are working, how they go. This is something that I don't think anyone in Iran can still understands, and I'm sure they are in a huge, huge shock. And I, of course, didn't mention also the annihilation of the upper echelon, the head of the IRGC, the Khadijazeh, the Air Force commander of the IRGC, Bakeri of the chief of staff. I mean, these are the people that Khamenei for years was working with them, was lying on them. He saw they were the one who will bring an answer to every situation. Suddenly, nobody is around him. I think it's not enough to concentrate only on the nuclear issue, which is of course important, but also the overall picture of the capabilities that have been shown on the Israeli side, and I would say the collapse of the system, of the security system of Iran on from different aspects. I think it is a major event that no question that the regime wants to repair everything. I'm sure they will try to do it. They are not giving up. They are not surrendering as Trump asked them to do. But the question, and they have a huge dilemma. They could go for an agreement with Trump and get a lot of money and a lot of sanctions released and everything. And they decided to waste time. And they saw that he said 2 months, and that doesn't mean anything. So they have made all the possible mistakes that they could have done. And I think they have started making mistakes a year ago, in April when they decided to attack Israel, and in October when they attacked Israel again. A huge mistake from their own point of view of security. They allowed Israel to understand that Iran is not such a big thing, and the barrier of deterrence on the side of Israel was completely crossed. And I think they have done all the mistake, the possible mistake, also by allowing Hezbollah to join the war for Sinwar and bringing Hezbollah to the situation it's now. So there is no one decision they have made that was a positive from their own interest, from their own security interest. All decisions were made coming from an hubris of we are strong, we have Russia, we have China, everyone with us, we are in Brexit, we are in Brexit, we are in Shanghai, and all these things. Listen, this is, I don't know if they are able to understand and to be honest enough in order to make all these decisions on how to repair the situation. So that is the dilemma now when they have to decide what to do. So on one hand, the Majlis has decided that they will not cooperate with the IAEA, which they didn't leave the NPT, but they say they will not cooperate. Okay, if they will not cooperate, the question will be who will judge what happens in Iran? And if it will be the US and Israel, I'm not sure. We are not going to be in a second round sometime in the future. On the other hand, and of course the economic situation that without relief of sanctions and everything. On the other hand, if they go back to negotiations, are they going to yield to something that they didn't want to give before the war? So now after the war? Difficult decisions to take in Tehran.
And I might add, actually, that the regime is terrified of being overthrown now. Tehran and other cities are full of security forces. There are checkpoints everywhere to an extent we haven't seen really in years. 700 people have reportedly been rounded up. There are some reports of dozens of Iranian Jews arrested as well. I haven't been able to confirm those, but it's very possible. So, like Sima said, this war could resume. Israel and Iran could go to war against each other, but I also think the regime has to balance the war with the internal security situation, because it knows if there's actual regime change, it'll start on Tehran street, and the regime has battling uprisings many times over the year, so it's expecting new uprisings to come as well.
Thank you, Alireza. One final question for both of you, and it comes from Sima's last answer. Were you surprised by the relative ease and speed with which Israel gained control of Iranian skies? You know, in terms of the public narrative over the last decades, one thing uniting both is Israeli narrative and Iranian narrative was that this was a fearsome, you know, an increasingly fearsome military force. So were you surprised by the relative speed of the Israeli advances? And secondly, were you surprised that on this occasion, Iran's regional proxies and allies chose to sit this one out?
Yeah, two good questions. First of all, I was surprised. I have to admit, I was surprised, partially. I mentioned the April and October attacks of Iran and the retaliation of Israel. In the October one, Israel showed that it knows how to take out the anti-aircraft systems. And therefore, I understood that we do know how to do it. And of course, this is the first step that is important in order to enable the free flight of the airplanes. So I understood that there is, on this issue, there is a good answer on the side of Israel. But I have to admit that the deep intelligence that was shown during this war was even a surprise for me, that I knew that Israel has a lot of information, but this one was really surprising. I think there are still some aspects of intelligence that were not revealed, but the capability to know exactly where everyone was at any time, to know exactly where the launchers are coming out, to know where are all the plans of the development of centrifuge. And so I understood, especially after what happened in Lebanon with the pagers and the walkie-talkies. No question that I knew that the Israeli intelligence, both the military one as well as the Mossad, were very much concentrated both on Hezbollah and on Iran, and all our efforts, budget, everything was put on these two issues because these were the two main threats to Israel. But still, I think it was a surprise, and I'm sure it is also a surprise for the Iranians.
Yeah, it's definitely a surprise for the regime. I wasn't surprised by Israel's military capabilities per se, because I knew the Islamic Republic has very weak air defense, and Israel had taken out the best air defense they had, the S-300 system from Russia. I was more surprised by the decision to attack the regime, because there were news reports that there was a fallout between Netanyahu and Trump. And so there was an impression in DC that because a portion of President Trump's MAGA movement is averse to war or do wars in the Middle East, as they call them, that I thought there would be pressure on Trump not to take military action. I was worried that the regime would use diplomacy like it did during the Biden administration to buy time and reach a very dangerous point. So I think the political calculation, the decision to attack surprised me. What impressed me, frankly, by the Israeli military action was the Israelis getting people like Shamkhani, the national security advisor. Of course, he's alive, he's not dead. Mm-hmm. But the fact that Israel was able to target Shamkhani and other Revolutionary Guards officers in Tehran's high-rises is, I think, a huge moral blow to the regime. That sort of action, I think, makes a very big impression on all Iranians, especially victims of the regime, but the regime itself, because Israel was able to target them in their homes in the middle of the night. And some of Tehran's most luxurious and supposedly secure neighborhoods. But I think the regime, like Sima said, has been put in shock, and I think they could still be in shock. It's going to take a long time for them to assess damage. And look, when you have a totalitarian political system like that of the Islamic Republic, it's not able to function well. They're not going to be able to do good self-assessments, see where they went wrong. I mean, this is a system based on a very stupid ideology, let's be honest. It's a very dumb ideology. And their ideology has cost Iran and Iranians a tremendous amount of lives and resources. But because this regime is so rigid, I think even its military decisions are very rigid. I think October 7th was Khamenei's undoing. I remember waking up in DC when October 7th happened, and I turned on my phone and went on X. And one of the first things that popped up was Khamenei showing a video of the music festival, people running away from the music festival, and him saying something like, "Run, stupid Zionists, run." And I was surprised at that, and I thought it was an incredibly foolish thing for him to do. October 7th was his undoing, and because Khamenei is cut off from reality, from proper advice, he keeps making big mistakes one after another, and I expect him to make more big mistakes if he's around long enough to make those mistakes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khaled Ben-Dor, co-editor of the Fathom Journal. I'm very, very pleased to be speaking today to Jonathan Rynhold. Jonathan has an array of hats. He's the head of political studies at Bar-Ilan. He's a senior researcher at the Begin Sadat Institute, and he's also the academic director of the Jonathan Sachs Institute at Bar-Ilan. And if I can add, he's also a friend, and he's also an expert on the Israeli-American relationship. So Johnny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So we've just had 12 days of, call it the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, and there were all sorts of examples of how the Israeli-American relationship played out. I think one of those was, and I think we don't yet know if this was originally part of the plan or not. I feel it probably wasn't, but we had Israel beginning an operation, and I guess hoping, but not knowing that the US would ultimately become involved. And then we have the US bombing Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, etc. We also have, towards the end, Trump saying, turn the planes around, they don't know what the F they're doing, etc., etc. To what extent do you think we've learned anything new or not about the Israeli-American or the Netanyahu-Trump relationship over the last 12 days of war?
Well, I think that we, rather than seeing new things, have been reminded of old things. So the idea that America will constrain Israel to prevent an escalation or the ending of a ceasefire It's something we may not have seen for a while, but we've seen many, many times. So in 1956, the US stopped Israel from continuing the Sinai campaign against Egypt and forced it to withdraw. In 1973, it forced Israel to accept ceasefires and disengagement agreements and stop the Israeli army from defeating the Third Egyptian Army, which had surrounded. And of course, it also enforced Israeli ceasefire in the Second Lebanon War in 2006. And there are other examples. So it's not unprecedented. It's just surprising because of the rhetoric and because people don't necessarily know the history. The other thing which is more unprecedented, though not completely, is Donald Trump declaring that the Israeli political system should end Netanyahu's trial. In other words, it's a direct intervention in Israeli domestic politics. Now, it's unprecedented in the sense that no American president has ever spoken so bluntly in that way. However, it's not unprecedented in the sense that Americans have many times tried to do things to help or hinder an Israeli prime minister they liked or didn't like in Israeli domestic politics, but never quite in that way. But one should remember that with Donald Trump, it's always a function of what he perceives his own personal and America's interest is at a particular moment in time. So, it wasn't that long ago that he was, telling Israelis that Netanyahu was the worst prime minister they ever had and terrible and an idiot and all of that. Now he's saying he's fantastic. And tomorrow, who knows? So I wouldn't, a promissory note from Donald Trump, has about 24-hour guarantee. After that, it's anyone's guess. So that's how I would say in terms of US-Israeli relations, there are two things that we need to be reminded of.
So I don't know if I should admit this lack of expertise, both to you and to the people listening, but when I was speaking to Jack after the US bombed Fordo, he said, did you think he would do it? And I said, on Monday, no. On Wednesday, yes. And on Thursday, Friday, not sure. That was before the Saturday night, Sunday. How surprised do you think we should have been or we should be about the extent to which America got involved? If it's America or even specifically Trump. And I also think to myself the tweet about kind of we control the skies of Tehran when actually it wasn't really the we, it was actually the Israeli Air Force. But how do you think we should understand this, both in terms of the specific thing that happened and what it means for the wider, if such a thing is if you're able to explain it, the wider Israeli-American relationship going forward?
Okay. So I think we should start by clearing the decks. And that is, don't try and analyze Donald Trump's words by what it would mean in policy terms. Analyze it in terms of what it means in leverage terms. In other words, Donald Trump makes statements about policy. We're going to bring down the regime. We're not going to bring down the regime. Yeah, which are designed to have maximum benefit in the short term for leverage. So if he says, maybe we should bring down the regime, what he's telling the Iranians is, if you don't stop now, I could go further, right? And then afterwards, when he wants them to say, look, I'm stopping now, come to negotiation, says, of course, we never bring down the regime and all the rest of it. So that is the way to understand Donald Trump. It is not stupid. It is the mindset of a negotiator in the marketplace, as opposed to what most American presidents or politicians are, which is lawyers. And he's very good at the leverage bit. What he's less good at is knowing what to do with it. And he himself admits he makes those decisions at the last minute. And so therefore, your sense of it changing on a day-to-day basis is perfectly sensible and almost certainly true. But nonetheless, there are certain parameters, certain instincts that Donald Trump has that are relevant to the US-Israeli relationship that we should pay attention to and that will help us to understand how at least the Trump administration will look at Israel going forward. The first thing to understand is that Donald Trump is part of an older tradition in American foreign policy. And that is something that's been common among populists, nationalist populists, going back 100 years. And in the 1930s, in the Republican Party, the America First group, and America First is a term that comes from the 1930s, the isolationists. Well, there were two groups of isolationists. Those on the right, the Republicans, were called belligerent isolationists. What did that mean? It doesn't mean that they don't have relations with any state. What it means is they don't want to commit to the security of other states. They don't believe in alliances. Alliances they see as things that entangle America in other people's conflicts, as opposed to something which magnifies and multiplies American power and enables it to play a global role because its allies take on some of the burden. So those people who are belligerent isolationists said, if you kill one American, we'll blow you off the map. If you kill another person in another country that's friendly with us, then we'll just say, that's very sad, they need to take care of it. And what changed America was Pearl Harbor. And when Pearl Harbor happens, those belligerent isolationists remain belligerent, but not isolationist. Okay, so they're very happy to drop the bomb on Japan, right, to save American lives. They're also willing to preempt attacks on America. And so what you had after 9/11 was a Bush administration, which took the preemption bit, but rejected the isolation bit, right? So the Bush was prepared to act unilaterally, even if your allies don't like it. But he was a classic American liberal internationalist, and he wanted to make the world more democratic, right? More free trade, democracy, all of that. Trump comes along after the massive failures of democratization in Afghanistan and Iraq and says, we're going back to belligerent isolationism, America first. What does that mean for Israel? What does it mean in the Middle East? It means if America, the homeland of America, is directly threatened or American citizens are directly attacked, we will respond with massive force. If our allies are attacked and there is no major American interest at stake, it's up to them to defend themselves, right? That is, in essence, what's going on here. So if we want to understand Trump's policy to Israel, on the one hand, why did he cut a separate deal with the Houthis that didn't include Israel? Why does he not pay attention to what Israel's strategic concerns in Syria and vis-a-vis Turkey? Why does he move ahead with relations with the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and leave Israel behind? Why in 2019, when the Iranians attacked a Saudi oil refinery, cutting off 30% of their oil production, did America not respond? And on the other hand, why does America blow up Fordow and attack the Isfahan and the rest? Why does it, when the Iranian-backed forces kill one American, does it kill the head of the Al-Quds Brigade of the Revolutionary Guard? And why in Afghanistan, when a brigade of American soldiers were having a hard time against the Taliban, did it drop America's largest conventional bomb, which was the power of the Hiroshima bomb? The answer in each case is narrowly understood American interests, American lives and the American homeland. So let's have a look at Fordow and this attack. A piece of intelligence which came out at the end of May, surprisingly made public, was that American intelligence believes that, and Israeli intelligence, that Iran is developing a long-range missile program, including intercontinental ballistic missiles, then that by 2035, they will have the ability to hit America directly. And also, if you look in the report in the Times yesterday, London as well. And so suddenly for Donald Trump, this becomes potential for an attack on America. And if you go into that with the mentality of 9/11 and the mentality of Pearl Harbor, you want to do it to them before they do it to you. And then you look at what's going on and you say, well, is this the window in time to do this. So Trump and the CIA and the head of Central Command, Mike Kurilla, all believe that Iran was what they term in American football on the 1-yard line. In other words, you don't go to the 1-yard line if you don't want to score a touchdown, if you're not intending very soon to score a touchdown. And therefore, all the stuff about have you made the decision to, to finally do the bomb is just like saying, have you decided which play you're going to make? It's not, it's obvious that you're going to try and do it. You've got everything ready all together. And this, therefore, is a window of opportunity. So Israel looked at it as a window of opportunity. And then Netanyahu says to Trump, do you want to be the guy on whose watch Iran goes nuclear? And then you won't be able to deal with those ICBMs. So it's a window of opportunity for America as well. And so I think that was very, very important. The other thing that was important, and this is more to do with domestic political calculations, divisions in the Republican Party and Trump's narcissistic tendencies, is that Israel was so overwhelmingly successful and far more successful than anyone a year ago would have considered it impossible, both in Israel and in America. And even 3 months ago, when they thought it was possible, would not have believed the degree of success. So when Israel massively succeed, if you're Trump, you wanna bask in reflected glory. And also, if you're dealing with people in the Republican Party saying this is going to lead to a massive war, we're going to have loads of problems with the Iranians, and the Israelis are showing that you can go to war with Iran without causing a regional escalation, in which Iran's allies in Lebanon and in Iraq and elsewhere stay out of it, right? Even the Houthis stay out of it. You're showing that the costs of escalation are low. And then you're saying the Israelis have created a pathway, which means our planes are not even endangered. So the risk is extremely low. The opportunity is extremely high. And you add all that together and you have an explanation for why the Trump administration takes part in this attack. Yeah, Trump would have obviously preferred a negotiated solution, right? And why, at the same time, it's quite happy to abandon Israel in lots of other situations.
How do you think that the pinpoint seeming success of the operation will change, if at all, the domestic debate within America, the aftermath of Iraq, the aftermath of forever wars, the aftermath of if you get involved in the Middle East, it will lead to thousands of American casualties. That was an argument getting pushed very much by the MAGA wing. And I know you've talked about the horseshoe theory of American politics. It wasn't just on the right, it was also on the left. Firstly, I'd love for you to just briefly talk about that a little bit, but also, do you think what Trump did that didn't lead to thousands of American casualties and a forever war, might that change the debate in some ways, do you think?
I think what it does is it gives a counterpoint and a counterpoint example. It's too early to tell how it will affect things because we don't fully have an end to the story, right? We don't have an end to the narrative of how this ends in terms of, is it effective? What happens next? But it gives a counterpoint, an important one, which says, not every military intervention is about taking over a country, sitting there for 20 years and trying to change its political system. You can have military interventions which are designed to prevent military programs. And that is a much narrower objective. It's much more achievable. And under certain circumstances, you can do that without paying a big price. So I think that it creates an opportunity for such a case. But right now, and as you mentioned, the spirit of American politics is elsewhere because of the power of the far right and the far left in American politics. So the far left in American politics believes that America, sets a very, very high bar for the use of force by America. And on the far left is distrustful and believes that America, is to blame, American imperialism in inverted commas, or American use of force or American intervention, and that the money that's spent on the military should be spent on domestic programs at home. On the right, they look at these wars and say it's a waste of money, right? Americans are not threatened. The American homeland is not threatened. And therefore, we should not waste our money on this. And what's the point, right? We should just focus on our own interest. And that's part of the thinking that you see with tariffs and with Trump saying we need to control the Panama Canal, Canada, and Greenland. In other words, it's a fortress America. If we control these areas, then we don't need to be positioned all over the world. We can have a sphere of influence thing. The Chinese can do what they like in their backyard. Everyone can do and we'll do what we like. And in the middle, the shrinking middle is that, free trade is basically good for everyone. If the Chinese are cheating, then we do have to put tariffs on them because they're not playing by the rules. But basically, free trade is a good thing. A recognition that there are people who lose out from free trade in America and they have to be helped. That was Bidenomics. That in the long run, it's no good like trying to produce things that could be produced cheaper elsewhere, like steel and coal. You have to invest in high technology, and the jobs from high tech will create jobs for people in restaurants and gyms and physiotherapists and schools and all the rest of it. And that internationally, and this is very Joe Biden, America needs to protect the free world. We can't make the whole world. We can't control it. We can't have a liberal international order. We can only have a liberal order in those parts of the world that we can sustain, and we have allies that can sustain it. And in the Cold War, that was called the free world. And therefore, we have to concentrate our resources on three nodal points, right? One is the Middle East because of the role of oil in the world's economy. The second is Asia because China is a rising peer competitor that doesn't play by the rules. And the third is Europe because it's our most important economic power and it's being threatened by Russia. The rest, like trying to waste your money on Afghanistan and democratizing Iraq, forget it. But there are certain nodal points, and the more allies we have, the more we can project our power and the more that we can maintain a world, in the words of Franklin Roosevelt, that's safe for democracy. And so that's the horseshoe. The people on the far left and the far right believe that America's political system, right, the liberal democracy, is not a good thing. They think it's a hoax, that it's either there to undermine white American interests or it's there to undermine working class American interests. And therefore their foreign policies also line up, stay out of things, but for different reasons.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Johnny. Always fascinating to speak to you. We could probably speak for a lot longer, but have to be another time. Really appreciate you you giving of your thoughts and your insights. And we hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.